Hi everybody. Yes, I'm now live. Fantastic. I never seem to get any better at this technology aspect of it, but I think this time I've got it right. So fingers crossed, it's all good. I'm coming at you from our lovely home studio, as you can see, with Rue's beautiful fabric behind me. She did tell me actually that she's got some that's got koalas on it, and it's orange, and she was very upset that I didn't intuit this and actually make my studio up with that instead of with the clouds. But what she doesn't quite understand is that I'm not
not pro.
I don't care. But no, yeah, this next week we will have koala bear fabric koala. Sorry, not koala bear. Koala. Nearly got in trouble there. Koala fabric behind me, just because Australia, baby. Hey. So I'm not going to waffle too much this time, because I have a feeling that when I post these on YouTube, anybody who actually watches them watches for about 45 seconds and goes, "My God, what is this crap?" and then turns off and never actually gets to hear any of the story. So I'll give you a couple of seconds for everybody to log in. Rue's sharing the links around and stuff. And I was just thinking I should probably show you who I share my office with. So this is my
original.
This is my octopus, and when we were looking for toys for the cover of books like this, for Shave My Spider, the Asia book, we were trying to find a monkey. Could we find the perfect monkey? I'm very picky, so it had to be the monkey, you know what I mean? It can't just be a monkey. So I looked on eBay, looked everywhere, and we were wandering around Toys R Us, and this guy just grinned at me, and I was like, oh my God, I instantly fell in love. So he's sat... Every book I've written since, he's sat there on my monitor looking at me. And then now Rue's started making bags and things out of cuddly toys. She buys them in books. So she goes to charity shops and she just buys sackfuls of cuddly animals. And every so often, I'll come back into my room and she's gifted me another little addition to my undersea menagerie. So first she came up with a lobster.
Make the noise. Do it.
Which makes a noise. I don't know how you make the
Make
noise.
him swim up to the camera. He's adorable.
Such things our lives are made of. And then I ended up with a very cheerful starfish. Hey, like in Charlie the Unicorn. Starfish, love me. And now it seems I've just literally acquired this one the other day. I now have a rather stoned-looking manta ray. He's sort of flopping along and he's like going, "Hey, dude." Yeah. Anyway, so that is my sea creatures done. So we never need to cover it again. So in case you're wondering how many sea creatures I have on my desk, if it comes up in a pub quiz, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 now. Actually no, there's a. Oh my God, it even squidges like a real octopus. There's this ridiculous boggly-eyed monster that I only just noticed.
Yeah, it was tucked behind the monitor.
Where the hell did that come from? Jeez, we dragged. This is like from what, a couple of weeks. Like this is gonna get crazy. Anyway, that's done. On to Kamikaze Kangaroos. As I said, lovely little toy on the cover, and that is the last time you'll be seeing these covers, because I got all new ones.
Yeah,
finally made some with real photographs of me doing stuff in Australia, and I've
all 6 books
figured that across all 6 books now, so I've got new covers. So happy to tell you. Anybody who so these ones are probably suddenly incredibly valuable on eBay. Not very well. If you can find one that's not signed, then you're really in the money. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into it. I'm going to start from the beginning, because this Kamikaze Kangaroos,
my favourite.
Yeah, a lot of my readers have said that this is their favourite one of my books, and it is also, it's one of my favourites, of course. But the beginning of Kamikaze Kangaroos is probably my favourite bit that I've ever written, and does include my favourite actual phrase that I've in my entire writing career. So apologies in advance if I start to piss myself laughing whilst reading this. It is likely to happen, because I was there. So this is even funnier for me. It's not just, it's not me trying to prove that my writing is amusing. It's just the memories. Oh my God. Anyway, so what I'm gonna do this time, I'll just start reading from the beginning and just see how far we get, because I don't want to cherry pick all different funny bits and then it'll be out of sequence, because next week we'll do another reading from Kamikaze Kangaroos. Hey, how lucky. So I'll just crack straight on with it. I should say apologies in advance to anybody who does decide to buy a paperback with or without a new cover, or anybody who already owns them, because the text is extremely small. Because like all my books, it's a bastard big book, and
someone talks too much.
Yeah, sorry, and I am a bit of a waffler, as you know, and this one is like nearly 400 pages, which when you turn it into a paperback, unless you have a tiny font, it becomes this huge big doorstop thing, which is so expensive to buy that no one wants to buy it. So anyway, my apologies to your eyesight, which definitely is not going to be getting any better reading this. In fact, I'm going to squint to see it myself.
You want goggles?
Okay, here we go. I'm out in my pyjamas as well, just to add to the professionalism the standards that we try and maintain for these little readings. Here we go. Kamikaze Kangaroos, chapter 1, concerning Rusty. When I first came to Australia, it was for pretty much the same reason that everyone comes to Australia. I was flat broke and I had no choice. Okay, so maybe that's not the most common reason. Can I get away with just saying it's a long story and leave it at that? No? Okay then. Here's the short version. My name is Tony and I like to travel. I've been doing it for years. I'm just not very good at it. I left England in search of adventure, and on a tiny island in the Gulf of Thailand, I found it. I'd been volunteering in an animal clinic, which is a notoriously poor way of making money. On the one hand, it had allowed me to work with kittens and puppies and the occasional monkey. On the other hand, I'd been bitten and shot at and had run-ins with the police and the mafia, visited hospital several times, and on one memorable occasion had been dangled from a tree by an enraged water buffalo. Around the time I was sitting on a ferry with the decapitated head of a dog in a polystyrene box, I started to wonder just what was going on with my life. Where was I headed? Apart from, to have a dog's brain autopsied. My love life had stalled, possibly because I spent most days covered in blood and poo. As for my career, well, did I mention that I was sitting on a ferry with a dog's head in a box? To any normal person, these would be considered warning signs. A not so subtle hint along the lines of "Get out now while you still can." But personally, I was rather enjoying myself. At least until my money ran out. I'd had to sell my body to medical science to get this far. I told you it was a long story. And as anyone who's seen my body can attest, it's not worth much. Owing to a slight administrative error, I'd missed my flight home to England by about 6 months. And I couldn't afford to buy another ticket. And I really didn't want to go home anyway, because I didn't want my grand adventure to end. And also because I was still technically AWOL from the British Army. I felt sure this would all blow over, but it seemed like a good idea to stay out of the country for a while anyway, just in case, So I emailed my sister, who was visiting a friend in Perth, Western Australia. They offered me a place to crash on their couch and a seat in the van they were fixing up for an epic year-long trip around the entire country. That sounded pretty good, so I told them I'd be there straight away. And then I spent the next 3 months diving instead. Thailand is a lot of fun. It's a very difficult country to leave, and diving there is pretty good. Still, it's not renowned as a path to quick riches, and anyway, I was rubbish at it. Hence, Australia. When I stepped off the plane, this is what I had with me. One pair of jeans, ripped badly, and not in an artistic way. Worryingly, they would also start to fray somewhat around the groin area.
Again.
I had 3 pairs of loose cotton fisherman's trousers, mostly bloodstained. A couple of t-shirts with the sleeves cut off, and several others branded Lidstone, with dubious comedy slogans printed on the front. 2 pairs of shorts, impregnated with sea salt to the point where they could no longer be folded in half, and a tiny Sony Vaio laptop on which the embryonic story about a bear was taking shape. At least I have shoes, I reminded myself, which is a surprisingly common first reaction to landing in Australia. I could tell the other passengers were thinking the same. Thank God that bloke has shoes, they were saying to themselves, judging by the state of what's hanging out of his jeans. Now if he could only afford some underwear. And that is what I was here to do, afford some underwear. And ideally 1 or 2 other niceties like food and shelter and onward travel. At the baggage carousel I picked up an enormous holdall crammed with every piece of diving gear imaginable, most of which I had inadvertently defrauded Lloyd's bank out of. My gaze lingered on an Italian-style espresso bar, but there was no way my bank balance would stretch to the price of a cup of coffee. That's hardly surprising though, since airport coffee costs 2 or even 3 times as much as underwear. Financial misfortune was preying heavily on my mind. At least until I saw the delighted faces of my sister Gillian and her best friend Rue waiting for me just beyond the sliding glass doors. They looked like a comedy double act, capering about in excitement. Jill, having inherited her genetic legacy from our mum, is rather gnomic in stature, whereas Rue's apparently Dutch ancestry meant she was tall and slender, so much so that she daren't go outside in a stiff breeze. Jill still sported a healthy tan from visiting me in paradise 3 months previously, whereas Rue, despite being born Australian, was so pale she could warn ships away from the coast. After joyful hugs all round, the girls practically dragged me out of the airport and frog-marched me over to the far corner of the car park. There, Jill introduced me to the van that would be carrying the 3 of us around Australia. "This is Rusty," she announced proudly. "No shit," I said. The door, when I opened it, came off in my hand, which was perhaps not the most auspicious start to our relationship. "Don't worry," Jill said. "Sometimes that happens." She shoved her glasses back up her nose and reached out to steady the door. "But Rusty's a good boy. I think he likes you." Little did I realise then, but over the next few months, Rusty was to be both my salvation and my nemesis in roughly equal measures. One thing was bothering me though. He? Aren't we supposed to refer to vehicles as she? You know, like they do with boats. "Don't be stupid, Tony. Look at him. Of course he's a boy." I had looked at him. In fact, I hadn't been able to look away. Since first clapping my eyes on him from halfway across the car park, it was kind of like watching a horror movie, when you know for sure somebody is mere seconds away from being eviscerated in a particularly savage manner, but for some reason your eyes won't leave the screen, won't even blink. And so I stared at Rusty as I approached, and part of me wanted to do my best Princess Leia impression and say, "You came in that?" Because, how to put this politely? The girls had painted him. They had cleaned him thoroughly, very carefully masked off his windows, and then covered him from brake shoes to sunroof in bursts of yellow, green, purple and red spray paint. It was very pretty. He looked like a unicorn had thrown up all over him. Inside each spray-painted circle was a white handprint. The girls had worn gloves and used them as stencils to create a van that was striving to give you a high five with every square centimetre of its being. Credit where credit's due, though. The girls had done a very professional job. Rusty looked fabulous. And as I climbed into the back, and Jill replaced the sliding door behind me, I couldn't help but notice they'd tailor-made curtains for all the windows, with psychedelic, multicoloured dolphins on them. I had to say something. "You know, if Rusty is a boy, I think he might be batting for the other team." Rue looked at me in the rearview mirror, her eyes wide in mock horror. "Are you saying our van is gay?" "Almost definitely. But don't worry, lots of my friends' vans are gay." "Don't listen to him, Rusty," she said, patting his dashboard. Then she changed gears, and Rusty groaned in pain. "Also, I think he's dying," I said. "Possibly of extreme old age." "Nonsense," said Jill. "He's fine. I think of him like a young lad, really. He's trying to give us his best, only his best isn't quite good enough." Right. So Rusty had not only a gender, but an appropriate character defect. I had a horrible feeling he was being modelled on me. But Rusty's life had been very different from my own, for which I was profoundly grateful. Rue and Jill took turns in relating this sorry tale to me as we clunked and clonked down the highway towards Rue's home in the South Hills of Perth. Rusty had started life as a young, brilliant white workman, but his innocence had only lasted until a gang of burly builders started putting their tools in him. Since then, every gruff, hairy-backed council labourer in the Shire had taken a ride. He'd been used, and used hard. For more than 2 decades, he'd been passed around the motor pool, and every tradesman they have a name for had been inside him. And most of them weren't too careful about it either. His days as a working boy were over. And so was his healthy prime, those middle years of taking a constant pounding with no outer signs of stress. Now Rusty was entering his golden years, that time of life when, if he'd been an animal, he'd either get adopted by an appropriate sanctuary or get taken out to a field and shot for dog food. After spotting him sitting forlorn and broken by the side of the road, Jill and Rue had wanted to rescue him immediately. In a fit of compassion, they'd paid well over the odds to liberate the old van, and then they'd lavished their attention on him. Their attention and their cash, as it turned out. Rusty had needed a fair bit more than a good clean and a few pairs of curtains. Dragging him unwillingly out of retirement had required replacing almost everything that could be replaced, from gearbox to the window latches. For anybody who's interested, here are the cold hard facts. Rusty was bought for $2,000 and it cost a whopping $2,500 to be made drivable. If the girls had known this at the time, he'd have been dog food for sure. And this eccentric, decrepit, borderline roadworthy vehicle was the trusty steed that was supposed to be carrying the 3 of us all around Australia. Or at least, as I was fond of saying, until it exploded in a rather garish fireball, killing the lot of us. But that wasn't terribly likely now, was it? Chapter 2. Meeting the locals. The late afternoon drive through Perth's suburbs was an eye-opener. Everything looked so clean and modern, so new, as though it had all been built yesterday, and to a plan made by somebody who actually knew how roads should work. There were wide, tree-lined boulevards uncluttered by parked cars. Junctions were spacious, and the traffic seemed suspiciously light, given how close we were to the city centre. The only time we ever queued was at the traffic lights. Most of the other cars on the road were either huge 4-wheel drives or something that looked like a saloon car cut in half with a pickup truck's tray glued on the back where the seats ought to be. It's called a ute, Rue explained, short for utility vehicle. How odd. Can you sit in the back? No, of course not. Then what's the point? Tradespeople use them for work so they can carry their tools around. As she said this, the ute sitting next to us roared, its driver flooring the gas and screeching the tyres, and then it blasted off from the lights at terminal velocity. Rusty was left trembling in its turbocharged wake. That happens quite a lot, Rue noted, as our van puttered up to speed. Maybe there's a certain kind of person that feels, threatened by being close to Rusty. And they always seem to be young guys in shiny new utes. Well, you're right about one thing, I said. They seem like the perfect car for tools. All of the houses we passed were detached on their own little plots of land. Most were single-storey affairs, the only exceptions being miniature mansions complete with Grecian columns and electronic security gates. There were enough of these scattered around the various districts we drove through to suggest a certain affluence. Obviously, someone was doing quite well here. And then the van laboured up a series of increasingly steep hills through scrubland and forest, right to the very edge of the famous Australian outback. This is where Rue lived with her family, in a sprawling, split-level bungalow that clung precariously to the top of its hillside plot. Welcome home, the girls chorused as Rue guided Rusty down a driveway that was more than half precipice. My first contacts in Australia were to be Rue's immediate family, and there were millions of them. Okay, not literally, but Rue did have 2 parents, Gerrit and Frida, both Dutch, and 3 sisters, one of whom was her identical twin Sonia. The 2 of them looked, identical, to the untrained observer. The same wavy, mousy brown hair, the same pale, slender frame. Even my sister had trouble telling them apart, and she'd been living with them for 3 months already, which was partially my fault. Unless you asked Jill, she would tell you it's entirely my fault. Personally, I blame Thailand. The 2 younger girls also could have been twins, Both tall, pale and incredibly slim, Wendy and Vicky differed from Rue and Sonia only in their hair colour. They were both proudly ginger. Rue's family gave me an encouraging welcome, considering I was the second member of the Slater clan to wash up on their doorstep. After warm hugs and handshakes all round, Jill went straight to the kitchen to put the kettle on, and straight away I felt relaxed and at home. I'd been introduced as Jill's brother, so I had to wonder how much further into our family their enthusiasm would extend. Next week, and these are all Jill's cousins! Eventually, they were bound to run out of sofas, even in a house this size. And it was huge, at least by English standards. The living room was as long as a tennis court, and lined completely on one side with glass. From there, and from the open-plan kitchen next to it, I looked out across a wide, raised decking and down into a sloping garden teeming with life. All of which was alien to me, apart from the butterflies, of which there were hundreds. The myriad snuffling, scurrying and hopping creatures were harder to glimpse as they darted between the trees, but Rue, a volunteer at several local wildlife centres, could identify all of them. But it was getting late. I'd come a long way, from the penniless vagrant that left Thailand to the penniless vagrant that turned up in Australia. It was the emotional miles, I reminded myself, that made me feel so suddenly old. I'd left all my friends in Thailand, along with a way of life I'd been enjoying for almost a year. From here it was the great unknown, which was exciting and terrifying in equal measure, and consequently quite draining. Rue loaned me a sleeping bag and led me to the landing. "I hope you don't mind, Tony. You're sleeping in the games room." Wow! I'd never been in a house with a dedicated games room before. Most people I know are lucky if they've got space for a games cupboard. I followed Jill, as she was also sleeping in there, and I was seriously impressed. Rue's games room was the size that, had it been in an English house, it would have been called the Grand Banqueting Hall. It was massive, with chunky wooden beams supporting a pitch ceiling and the same wall of glass effect that characterised the lounge. Cousins? Hell, my entire family tree would fit in there. Probably best not to mention that, though, in case they get scared. And so I passed my first night in Australia, surrounded and comforted by all the sounds of nocturnal life. Rustling leaves and humming insects, the constant drone of cicadas, every so often a clatter on the roof that sounded like a hippo had fallen off his unicycle onto it. Shit! I sat bolt upright the first time I heard it. "Jill, was that you?" Jill was sleeping on the sofa opposite me, dead to the world as usual. So I lay back down and listened to the drumming of feet on the roof. After a while I was pretty sure that something way too heavy to tap dance was tap dancing up there. But it's the big things in Oz aren't dangerous, I remembered as I drifted off to sleep. It's the little things you've got to watch out for. Changing countries so abruptly can be very disorientating. I woke up in a sleeping bag on a strange sofa, looking up at white painted roof beams and thought, where the hell am I? I've had this experience quite a few times, and normally a quick glance around the room reveals enough clues to jog my memory. So I turned my head to the side, and there was a big lizard looking at me. Oh, that's right, Australia. The lizard was about 2 feet long, about 3 feet away, and covered in sleek black scales. It looked slightly disappointed, as though it had been intending to suck my brains out through my nose while I slept and had its dinner plans abruptly cancelled. "Hey, don't be sad," I said to it by way of an apology. The lizard froze for a second, then skittered off under a bookcase, moving faster than something that size had any right to. I blinked for a few seconds, thought maybe I'd been hallucinating, but I decided to mention it to Rue because sometimes people like to know if the cast of Jurassic Park takes up residence in their guest bedroom. I broached the topic over breakfast as we stood in the kitchen eating tea and toast. So, drinking tea and eating toast. I couldn't really think of a polite way to bring it up, so I just waited for a natural break in the conversation and blurted, "Is there a giant lizard living in your games room?" "I don't know," Rue replied. "Maybe." "Oh, all right then," because I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Apparently, the weirdness of my mind was no match for the weirdness of reality in Australia. Rue was quite nonchalant on the matter. "I was wondering about him. I think I've spotted him a couple of times, but he's too quick to get a good look at." "Well, I saw him pretty good. He's about this big." I held up my hands, about shoulder width apart, and he's black all over. It looks kind of evil, really. "Ah, it might be a blue-tongued skink." "A what? Blue-tongued? That doesn't sound real." "It's real." So is it him making all the noises on the roof then? No, that'll be the possum. Possums, eh? Those little hopping guys from the garden? No, those are bandicoots. Okay, so you are so making this up now. No, not at all. If I was making it up, I'd tell you about the drop bears. The what bears? Drop bears. It's a story we invented to tell foreigners who are freaking out about the wildlife here. Basically, drop bears are like the evil carnivorous twin of koalas. They hang around in trees looking innocent, but when a person walks underneath, they drop down onto them and bite their faces off. Whoa. But you do have koala bears. Koalas, she said flatly. They are not bears. Right. But drop bears are fictional. Okay, I think I've got it. Possums and skinks and bandicoots. Man, the animals in this country are bizarre. But you have kangaroos at least. Not personally, but yes, we have kangaroos. And you have all of the world's deadliest spiders here, don't you? Oh yes, spiders. That reminds me, hang on. Rue led me back into the games room, which was a little disconcerting. She took me over to the furthest corner and pointed into it. There, see that one? Oh, fuck me! The spider was as big as the palm of my hand. I could see every hair on its long, spindly legs. This is just inside? Yeah, this one's fine. Those aren't dangerous. This is a huntsman. It's harmless. What, so it doesn't bite? Oh, of course it bites, but it doesn't hurt. Not much. It's not poisonous. And it eats all the mosquitoes and flies. But it bites. Yes, but you don't need to worry about it. That one down there, that's the one you have to be careful of. What? Where? Oh. Tucked further back into the same corner was a tiny little cobweb with a tiny little black spider clinging to it. See the red stripe on its back? I shoved my head in for a closer look. Yep, I think so. That means it's a redback. They're pretty bad. Like poisonous. Like deadly. But no one really dies from it these days because there's antivenom in all the hospitals. Well, that's comforting. I feel much better about having one in my bedroom now. Don't worry, I'm going to kill that one. They shouldn't really be inside, but when you live out here... She trailed off with the kind of shrug that says, what can you do, really? Which was considerably less comforting. How do you kill him? Oh, I'll just squish it with my thong. This seemed like an embarrassingly intimate revelation, so I decided to be all manly and offer my services instead. No need to stain your knickers. I'll do it with this shoe. She looked slightly puzzled, but was happy enough to relinquish spider bashing duties to me. Don't get too close though, she warned. I froze. Why? They don't spit at you, do they? No, but you're getting close to the huntsman, and they jump. Oh, Jesus. So jumping, biting spiders the size of my hand? Yep. Welcome to Australia. Bet you're glad you've got a lizard in your bedroom now. As a footnote, Rue was destined to remain confused on this occasion. The thong confusion. Because there is no good way to apologise for telling a girl not to stain her panties. It's notoriously difficult to pass that shit off as a cultural misunderstanding. But a thong in Australia is a flip-flop.
A flip-flop.
I'll read one more. The curve. All right, you lot. It's time to admit it. 95% of everything you know about Australia comes from watching old episode of Neighbours. No? Really? Okay then. Home and away. Don't worry. Same here. Only it was more embarrassing for me because I was actually in Australia. So on my first morning in the country, I was forced to reevaluate my knowledge. For example, as far as I knew, it was always summer in Australia. I knew that all the blokes loved beer and all the women were called Sheila. And I knew that Bondi Beach was the spiritual home of the nation, and as a direct result of this, the whole population spend their entire lives in swimwear. Right? Wrong. I'd arrived in midwinter. In the hills around Perth, it was freezing, shivering, ball-achingly cold, particularly at night and in the mornings. Wearing a bikini outdoors was inviting death by hypothermia, as well as earning quite a few strange looks. It didn't matter how good the beer was, I couldn't afford to drink it. Alcohol turns out to be eye-wateringly expensive in Australia, and I was 2,498 miles from Bondi Beach. And if you call enough women Sheila, sooner or later, one of them will punch you in the face. I was now living with 6 women of different age groups, and not a single one of them was called Sheila. I didn't have a clue what they were called, something I only realised when the phone rang halfway through that first morning. I picked it up without thinking. "Hello," I said. "This is the house of some Australians." One distinct downside of open plan living is that when you make a gaffe like this, everyone can hear it, no matter where they are in the house. All of them shrieked with laughter, and by the time I'd handed the phone off to one of the girls, the caller must have thought they'd dialed an insane asylum by mistake. I later learned that Rue's family name was Reinen, adapted by her parents from the Dutch Reinen. Did I say that right?
Ryan, yeah.
Right. That day involved a fairly steep learning curve. I imagine that most tourists visiting Australia come and go without ever having to learn certain things, but living where Rue did, on the edge of the Western Australian outback, survival lessons were disturbingly important. I think they get taught at preschool. First up, I learned that a thong is not actually a skimpy piece of underwear. It is in fact a multi-purpose item of footwear which most sane individuals would refer to as a flip-flop. I say multi-purpose because the primary use of a pair of thongs, in Rue's house at least, was to kill things. They can also be used to fix certain parts of a car's engine, are often thrown at people to get their attention, form a miniature floating table for something light, like a bag of crisps, in the swimming pool, and, in an emergency, can even be used to paddle a canoe, though I only found this out much later. Because all Australians wear them all the time, unless they're working in heavy construction, and sometimes even then, I was offered the use of a spare pair of thongs. They were to be worn generally outside, but I had to be careful wearing them in the backyard because of snakes. I had to love this aspect of Australian culture. Rather than chaining the back door shut, nailing thick wooden planks across it, topped off with a sign saying, "Keep out, there's fucking snakes in the garden." Instead, they say things like, "If you do go out there barefoot, try to be a bit careful." But at least the snakes weren't on the inside. Often. "So I don't use a thong to try and kill snakes then," I joked. "No," Rue said, looking vaguely disgusted. "Why would you want to kill snakes?" Which was a fair point. I just had to hope the feeling was mutual. Because I'd arrived in the coldest part of the year, with no money and almost no clothing, I had to borrow a fleece from one of Rue's slender sisters. It had "Bush Ranger" emblazoned across the front. I was the only one who seemed to find this funny. It was hard to tell whether this was a language barrier thing or whether it was because my sense of humour stopped developing at age 12. Regardless, now that I was suitably equipped to handle the cold, I had a busy day ahead of me. The girls had planned an epic road trip around the whole of Western Australia and been waiting for me to arrive so that I could accompany them. But now, not only had I arrived 3 months late, I'd also arrived penniless. It's okay though, we're blaming Thailand, remember? So before we could set out on our grand Australian adventure, there were a few little details I had to take care of, like earning enough money to pay for it. Luckily, both the girls had been in this situation before, about 3 months ago, as it happened. They fired up Rusty and drove me to the nearest bank, where I braced myself for an orgy of form filling, coupled with the high probability of being laughed out of the place. I always feel self-conscious in banks, as though the staff can see right through me and know instantly that I'm a man of very dubious financial security. The fact that I was wearing ripped, stained jeans and a girl's jumper was also a fairly poor indicator. I half expected alarms to blare and a giant illuminated arrow to swing down from the roof with a warning sign on it blinking, "Credit risk! Credit risk!" But I was pleasantly surprised to find that most of the bank's customers were covered in concrete. "Rich tradies," Rue pointed out. "That's who owns all those mansions. Builders and plumbers, and especially the miners. There's the guys on the big money." That was unexpected. Plumbers are expensive at home, but I don't remember many miners that earn their fortune. I distinctly remember being threatened with mining as a job at school if I didn't work hard enough and pass my exams. The cartoons were right, I thought. Everything is upside down here. A very efficient lady typed in the details of my passport and accepted Rue's family address as mine. "What funds would you like to open the account with?" she asked me. "Funds?" "Yes, you need to deposit some money into the account to open it." "Ah, how much do I need to put in?" "Anything you like. $1 will do." Guys, anyone have $1 they can lend me? Rue dug into the pocket of her jeans. Here, have 2. She handed me a small golden coin. Travellers are often confused by this, as are the natives, but for some reason their $2 coin is roughly half the size of their $1 coin. And just like that, I had a bank account. Next, the girls took me to an employment agency called Select. They'd both got temp jobs through this agency and they reckoned there was plenty of work going. Now, this did involve a lot of paperwork. I spent about 2 hours filling it all out, taking maths tests and English tests, and then I sat through the inevitable video about health and safety in the workplace. It was delightfully lurid, with graphic reenactments of accidents so improbable I had to applaud the scriptwriter. I mean, what are the odds of being decapitated by a stepladder? I was tempted to try it just to find out. Finally, the lady marking my answer sheet came over to me. OK, so we have some labouring work for you. I'm afraid it's minimum wage stuff, though. Oh, well, that's OK. What is the minimum wage, by the way? How old are you? 28. OK, so it's $18.30 an hour. I had to sit and think about this for a few seconds. It was tough to calculate because I don't have 18 fingers, and the exchange rate was a little better than $1.50 to the pound, and I don't have 1.5 anything on my body, unless you count my nose. And when I'd done the sums, I still thought I'd made a mistake. Is that? It can't be. $18 is more than 10 English pounds an hour. That's double the minimum wage in the UK. That's more than what my mum earns as a qualified nurse. I know, she said, it's not great, but we do get better stuff in. Only you wanted to start straight away. Hell, I'll start right now. Where's the job? She looked impressed by my enthusiasm, probably because she hadn't seen my bank account. You could start tomorrow if you'd like. Tomorrow would be my second full day in the country. To celebrate the breathtaking swiftness of my transition from unemployed bum to valued employee, we first headed to Woolies, a supermarket, to buy a chuck, chicken, and some snags, sausages, and nearly also bought a kangabanger, kangaroo sausage. It was like a free lesson in Aussie slang. Next, we went to buy some goon. It's wine in a box, Rue explained, or wine in a bag inside a box. It's what all the kids drink because it's the cheapest thing they can get. But we couldn't buy it there because the supermarkets aren't allowed to sell booze. For that, we had to go to a separate liquor store, which Aussies, with their typical subtlety, call a bottle shop. 3 things about the bottle shop blew me away. First up, it was massive, not far off the size of the supermarket we'd just come out of. Second, it was unfeasibly expensive. The cheapest bottle of vodka on offer was $45. That's 30 quid. I know why the minimum wage was so high now. Oh, and the third thing that blew me away, it was a drive-through bottle shop. Seriously, I couldn't help but think that sounds like a really, really bad idea. Almost like an accident waiting to happen. I mean, isn't there some kind of thing about drinking and driving not going terribly well together? I was kind of surprised there wasn't a police station next door. I'd love to have been at the meeting where some guy came up with that idea. How bad is it having to park up and get out of the car every single time you need to buy a beer? It's a bloody disaster. If only there was something we could do about it. Talk about first world problems. Anyway, fully half of the cavernous building was devoted to wine. They had dry, medium and Lexia. It sounded more like a car than a beverage, but absolutely nothing in the whole shop was labelled sweet. After reading the labels on half an aisle's worth of wine bottles, we discovered that Fruity Lexia is what everyone else in the world would call a sweet white wine. Clearly some kind of award was in order for the most confusing labelling system in the world, but we couldn't complain too much. Once we'd identified Fruity Lexia as our poison of choice, we discovered why kids love the stuff so much. A 4-litre cardboard cask of it was only $10. You're not supposed to say, yeah, like that while I'm reading.
So good.
We were the only people in the queue not buying at least 2 giant crates of beer. Supermarket trolleys were provided, presumably for those industrial-sized booze purchases that wouldn't fit through a car window. Alcohol buying in this country was obviously taken very seriously. I felt rather inadequate with my little box of goon, walking out of the bottle shop. And the next morning I started work unloading container trucks of bog roll. All right, you can laugh now. But it could have been worse. Rue was working in a textile factory, categorising towels, and Jill was cleaning public toilets. Oh yes, we were living the Australian dream, all right. And I'll read one more because this one's a little one. Are we done there? Or
Yeah.
how's the time?
One more.
One more.
Okay.
Ready for the off. And so, for the next 2 weeks, that was our life. We got up early, painfully early in Jill's case. We worked hard, and we enjoyed several delicious barbecues, cooked and eaten out on the Raynham family veranda. We even went to the park for one, because there were free gas barbecues in the park. And not just a couple, but loads of them, dotted around a stretch of riverbank, complete with large, shaded picnic tables. In England, they'd have been covered in graffiti and vandalised beyond recognition within half an hour of being put there. But here, only minutes from the city centre, overlooking a wide curve of the Swan River and the million-dollar residences on the far side of it, the great steel hot plates were spotless. "I can't believe they're so clean," I said to Jill. "I know," she replied. "I cleaned them. It's not just toilets we do, you know." So that's where my tax dollars are going, paying you to keep the barbecues clean. Nothing wrong with that, is there? No, I think it's the best system in the world. It might not be a tourist idea of the Australian dream, but it's far closer to the average Australian's version of it. Hard yakka, that's work, honestly done, a good laugh and a cold beer at the end of the day. We never went to the beach once. We did go ice skating though. In fact, Rue's entire family squeezed into Rusty for the trip to an ice rink amusingly named Cockburn.
Coburn.
Probably because that's the most common injury men get when ice skating, Jill quipped. "No," Rue explained. "It's pronounced Coburn." "I wouldn't know," I told her. "I've never suffered from it." We also made a couple of return trips to the bottle shop, hereafter to be referred to as the Bottle-O, because Australians suffer from a pathological inability to use complete naming words and must shorten everything and add an O on the end. Don't ask, it's the law. Even if it ends up harder to say than the original word. I found it hilarious listening to my new co-workers call each other around the yard. Every one of them was a Jono or a Steve-O. It confused the hell out of them for a while when I introduced myself as Tony. I could see them racking their brains trying to figure out where to put the O. They had to call me mate for the first couple of hours, but it didn't take them too long. Halfway through my first morning, I was rechristened Tono. Sitting with Rue's family on their deck, watching the sun set through the trees, I took a swig from my stubby, small beer bottle, and breathed a sigh of relief. That's what you need, a nice cold beer after a hard day's work. Jill was quick to respond to that. "Oh, you poor man. Is it heavy lifting all that toilet paper?" "Hell yeah, it is. I can steal you some if you want." "Dude, I work as a toilet cleaner. One of the few perks is an endless supply of free bog roll and unlimited bathroom breaks." After 10 days of work, I had amassed a little more than $800 after tax. It was a stunning revelation. To achieve the same level of income back home, I'd need a qualification considerably more impressive than my degree in acting. Admittedly, every qualification is better than a degree in acting, with the possible exception of a degree in philosophy. But there was no doubt about it. My earning potential, at least in Perth, was incredible. In my last temp job in England, it would have taken me a month to accrue this much money. Now, after just 2 weeks, I was good to go. A long-awaited trip was about to commence. It was time to head north. Step 1. Pack the car. This can be a bit of a chore, especially when you're travelling with 2 young women. Neither Jill nor Rue were particularly ladylike at this point, so at least I wasn't loading suitcases full of cocktail dresses and Jimmy Choos. They didn't even pack a hairdryer between them. But still, they conjured up an impressive amount of gear, from pots and pans to folding canvas chairs. My sole contribution came in the form of one large holdall crammed with diving equipment. I managed to wedge it under the last row of back seats, well out of the way, and there it stayed, completely untouched, for the entire time we travelled in Rusty. It was a bit of a mistake, that, but how was I to know? Australia, at least the bit we were planning on visiting, is defined by its distinct lack of water. Damn it. And speaking of water, we put a 25-litre plastic tank full of the stuff in the boot, because getting stranded in the outback kills dozens of people every year. Most die in less than 2 days of thirst. You've got to respect that kind of environment. For the same reason, we added a jerry can with 15 litres of petrol in it. Not to drink, of course. North of Perth, fuel could be hard to come by. Petrol stations were generally spaced a full tank apart, so too much detouring could leave us unable to reach the next one. Avoid becoming stranded in the bush at all costs is the advice routinely dispensed by the AA and the RAC. We had membership of the latter, but would be well beyond their call-out range for much of the trip. Beyond the range of mobile phones, even. What happens if you get lost? Rue's sister Sonia asked. Do you want to take my GPS? Nah, we'll be fine, said Rue. We've got a map. That map is 10 years out of date, Sonia pointed out. Rue wasn't fazed. Don't worry, I'm pretty sure there's only one main road once you get out of Perth. I admired her confidence, even if I didn't share it. What if we do get lost? I whispered to Jill. Oh, that's all right, I thought of that. She led me around the back of Rusty and pointed to a sign stenciled across the tailgate. It read, Don't follow me, I'm lost. See, she said. Fair enough. It took us a day and a half to get Rusty fully packed. Because I had so little equipment, I had to borrow various things from all three of Rue's sisters. A sleeping bag, a pillow, cutlery and a plate, and most importantly, a towel with the purple octopus embroidered on it. Any fan of Douglas Adams can tell you, when setting off on an adventure such as this, you must know where your towel is. Rusty's boot was stuffed to the gills. A tent and blankets, cooking gear and clothes, a huge plastic crate full of all the food we could scrounge from Rue's parents' kitchen, and another, not substantially smaller plastic crate of books. Books? Well, we had a van instead of a bunch of rucksacks. Might as well fill it. Poor Rusty. With the three of us sat inside, it was a miracle he could get out of the driveway, which, like all the driveways in Rue's hometown, angled downwards at about 45 degrees. We said an emotional farewell, particularly to Frida and Gerrit, who had fed and sheltered us without a second thought. Rue was particularly upset, leaving her entire family all at once for an unknown length of time. We'd all had to do it at some point. My family farewell was now almost a year behind me, and yet not a day went by when I didn't miss my parents. I worried about them constantly because, well, if you'd met my parents, you'd know. And so we pointed Rusty north and set off into the wilderness. And shall I leave it there? We've got one more very short one, or
You could do a short one.
I did one.
Yeah, go on.
One very short one. Here we go.
Best.
Heading up. As we drove through Rue's charming outer suburbs, Jill and Rue explained their carefully crafted plan for this trip. They'd had 3 months to prepare, to research alternative routes, to pick desirable stopping places, and to choose which of the attractions along our path were must-see. This is how they laid it out for me. We're going north, Jill explained. OK, why north, I asked. Dunno, just 'cause. Ah. We can't go west, Rue pointed out, because Rusty can't swim, and west goes into the sea. To the east, there's nothing between here and Sydney but the desert, and I'm not sure Rusty would survive that trip. And south? Ah, well, we already went south, Jill admitted. A bit. And so they took it in turns describing to me the trip they'd undertaken as a maiden voyage for Rusty, weeks before I was due to land in the country. To say it was a rip-roaring success would be a lie. Rue's mum, Frida, had accompanied the girls to see a massive rock formation known as Wave Rock because... What? Oh, you got there before me. Well, I can't help it if the Aussie style of naming things lacks creativity. Then again, what else do you call a 14-metre high chunk of rock that looks like a wave? Answers on a postcard. Anyway, about halfway there, Rusty had started to overheat. So they pulled off the highway onto the amusingly named Strange Road. They'd waited till he cooled off, put loads of water in him, then went to start the engine. And nothing. Just a click. The battery was dead. Noticing they'd parked Rusty on a slight incline, the girls decided to try jump-starting him. Backwards. Because that was the direction the slope was in. They'd had no problem picking up speed, but it was around that point that Rue, in the driver's seat, had realised that Rusty's brakes were hydraulic and only worked when the engine was switched on, as did the power steering. Careening backwards at quite a clip, Rusty had left the road, ploughed down a steep bank and crashed arse first into a stout wooden fence. The fence snagged the bumper, and luckily so, otherwise it would have been all downhill from there. After several hours waving at the handful of cars that passed, they managed to enlist the help of a group of local farmers. The guys drove off and came back with a beat-up old tractor. Together, with chains, elbow grease and a goodly amount of swearing, they extricated Rusty from the fence, hauled him back up the hill and got him running in an epic 8-man push-starting marathon. Before they drove away, the helpful farmers had given them 2 pieces of advice. 1, to drive without stopping until they found a place to buy a new battery, and 2, join the RAC. Which is why we now had a membership. Because it always pays to be prepared. After hearing how scary and remote the outback seemed, the reality was somewhat softer and less threatening. As the buildings became more sporadic, the urban areas gave way to farmland. Before long, we were enveloped by it. Thousands upon thousands of acres of wheat crops wilting in the afternoon sun. Stands of tall, white-barked trees broke up the monotony, adding to the foreignness of the landscape. But what set it apart was, most of all, was the scale. I was used to seeing fields neatly divided up by hedgerows and roads, littered with electricity pylons and never far from a village or 6. Here the fields stretched to the horizon in all directions, with only log fences and the occasional barn to prove that humans laid claim to them. The further we got from the city, the less tamed the land became. Red dirt showed through a covering of spiky grass and shrubs. We'd gone from arable, wheat belt farming to a much harsher wilderness frontier, probably while I was asleep. I know this was my first taste of rural Australian countryside, but it was lovely and warm inside Rusty, with the throb of the labouring engine and the rumble of the road beneath our wheels. Sleep was impossible to avoid. But don't worry, I wasn't driving. I was cabbaged full length across the middle row of seats, with my head on a pile of blankets. I defy anyone not to doze off under such conditions. Almost at sunset, we arrived at our destination, an area of desert full of strange protruding rock formations called the pinnacles. They were like the stalagmites that form on the floor of caves, only here there was no limestone dripping from the ceiling, just the rocks themselves thrusting up through the earth like talons, or termite mounds. We parked right amongst the rocks, having arrived late enough to avoid both the crowds and the admission fees, and Rusty was dwarfed by the stony spires. The girls ran around, taking far more photos than was strictly necessary. I had to point out that, when they looked at them later on, all they'd really have were dozens of pictures of pointy rocks. It's going to make for a fairly boring slideshow, I warned. But there was a raised viewing deck, which we duly climbed up to investigate. The added height meant we could see even more rocks, and could confirm for ourselves that they were, in fact, all pointy. From our new vantage point, for as far as it allowed us to see. Oh yes, none of this fobbing you off with a few pointy rocks when the rest of them are completely normal shit. You get that so much these days. As a tourist attraction, well, it's never going to rival Disneyland. We should probably go, Jill said, because there's only so long you can run around a bunch of big pointy rocks and go, ooh. We stayed for the all-important sunset photo, and the girls were suitably impressed. The flaming orange sky cast a dramatic silhouette, which looked remarkably like the shadows of lots of big pointy rocks. Shall we rock on? Said Rue, climbing back into the driver's seat. My response was stony silence. It wasn't hard to locate the campsite, because there was only one. It was on the road, of which there was also only one. Rue had been dead right. Since leaving Perth's northern suburbs, we'd seen exactly one junction. We were only a few hours north of the city, and already the land felt desolate, empty, wild. We set up the tent for the first time in complete darkness, which is easy enough if you know the tent and each other and can work as a team. But there were 3 of us, all with our own opinions, and one rather small tent which seemed to be missing most of its vital components. By the time we thought of using Rusty's headlights, it was fully night time, and we still hadn't had anything to eat. Right, Rue said, to the kitchen. Whoa, there's a kitchen here? Of course, all campsites have kitchens. How else would you cook dinner? I thought that was what the little gas stove was for. Oh, only in emergencies, if we're free camping by the side of the road. But no, this is a proper campsite. She held up the paper map we'd been given on arrival. There's a kitchen, there's a games room, there's a TV lounge, ooh, and a pool. Wow, that's just wow. Don't they have this stuff in campsites in England? No. They're more like a place to pitch your tent, some grass, and that's about it. Oh, we got those too, she said. We call them fields. And that's the end. I'll leave you there.
That's brilliant.
Because we're going to have something left for next time. I'm not going to get through it. Don't worry. I'll try and do a few weeks worth of readings from Kamikaze Kangaroos because I love this book. It's got some real laugh lines. that morning in Australia, I'll never forget it when I woke up and there was this, and I'm not even joking. People sometimes ask me how much is true of my books and how much am I exaggerating and stuff. And I'm actually, honestly not. I do not exaggerate in any of my books apart from when I'm actually telling a joke and I take the piss. It all really happened and it was just like that. The only thing I do is I sometimes make people say things that are slightly wittier. But Rue saying, aren't you glad that there's a lizard in your bedroom now? It's possibly the funniest moment of my entire life. Because yes, I suddenly was quite grateful that we have a 2-foot lizard living in my bedroom.
And he's probably still there.
Probably is still there, actually. They actually sold that house recently, and while we were clearing it out, we saw a couple of lizards. And I actually got a photo of Rue. She picked one up and caught it. She was holding it like this enormous lizard. I was like, what the hell? Look, he's a little lizard. He's quite cute. He's very friendly. And he did have a oh no, he didn't have a blue tongue. No, that wasn't a blue tongue one. He was just a big black kingskin, hence the substantial size. Yes, they had a whole family with them. They were living in the roof and the walls and pretty much wherever they wanted to, really.
I love Australia. I'm so glad we live here.
Yes. So, right, thank you very much, guys. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to say goodnight because it's getting late here. So stay safe and look after yourselves, and I will see you all next week. Have a good one, guys.
Bye, guys.